New unemployment numbers are in. 22 million total have lost their jobs so far. When can we start going back to work? I'll have answers for you. Plus, Democrats are still obstructing rescue funds and also obstructing recess appointments for the administration. We'll talk about the stress pandemic, which is also very real. Guests include Alex Berenson, who is willing to challenge the consensus on COVID-19, and Congressman Devin Nunes on what's going on with Pfizer reform and the OD&I. That and more coming up. Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show, everybody. Appreciate you being here with me as always. Look, we know we are in a fight. No question about it. We know the country is dealing with something it has never seen before. Not in this way. Not in a modern era of instant communication, of media dominance, of the national conversation, the way that it's currently going, at least. We've never been in this circumstance before. So all of our previous wargaming, all of our previous efforts to understand how something like this would go, I'm not saying they're worthless, but we have to remind ourselves there is no playbook for this. There is simply no playbook, and that's why, as we see another 5.2 million Americans filing unemployment claims for the week ending April 11th, so that's last week, and that's over the course of 4 weeks now, a total of 22 million people losing their jobs. We are heading very rapidly now to 20% unemployment. The real unemployment rate, some are estimating now at about 18%. We will be at 20% in a matter of days. The Great Depression had an unemployment rate of 25% at its peak. So we have voluntarily, and it's still stunning to say this, we have voluntarily put ourselves in a position where 1 in 4 working Americans, soon I should say, 1 in 4 working Americans will be out of a job, because we're going to be at 25% in no time. We're going to be at that Great Depression level. That's a matter of a few weeks from where we are right now. I know that some of the rescue money has gone out there. There's the $1,200 everyone's focused on. There's also an additional $600 per, I believe it's per week maximum for unemployment claims, but there's additional money coming out for unemployment as part of unemployment insurance. They have this whole package that's trying to help workers, working families make it through this period of time. They're already running out of money, and we are running a test here, a test that we don't ever want to have to do. Is it possible for the government to, in essence, run out of money because it debases its money? This is what could happen very soon with inflation. I know right now the only thing that, when I ask people, and I'm trying to get as much information about this as possible, talking to the smartest economists, Wall Street folks, people that just understand the macro picture pretty well and get paid to get it right, which is different than a lot of the people you see going on TV that work at universities who get everything wrong. You know, people like Paul Krugman at the New York Times, Nobel laureate economist. Guy gets everything wrong. No one ever seems to care. I like to talk to people who have a history of getting things right. And one note on this that I'll tell you that I've gotten is you have to remember that because if America alone was going through this, economically, put aside just for a moment, this is a pure economics discussion. I'm not focusing on the virus and the latest efforts to cure and suppress and all that. Put that aside for just our purposes for this moment in time. We're just looking at the economy. And if we were doing this, but other countries weren't going through this, then our currency would be we'd be in big trouble because then the market effects, the desire for dollars, the willingness to use dollars as the global currency of exchange, that would come into question, I think, rapidly. But because every country, every major economy is going through this, although we don't really understand the extent to which this has really hit China. And I will be talking about the latest information on the Chinese lab Wuhan virus theory later on in the show, too. Who's been telling you for weeks that that's what's we're going to find out that's what happened. I'm just saying. You guys come here because the analysis is good, because the cooking is exceptional and the analysis is good. So we will get to that later on in the show. But on this economic issue, because the whole world is going through this is a global depression. It's not just a U.S. depression. So maybe that gives us greater leeway for just taking a blank checkbook approach to dealing with this problem right now. Total weekly claims fell close to 1.4 million from last week, 6.6 million unemployment claims. So I suppose it could have been worse. But the 1 week record, week record before this was 695,000 jobs in October of 1982. Well, we are seeing numbers that no one can really understand, compute, assess, predict. We are just in this world where we're making it up as we go along with the economy right now. We don't know what this is really going to do. I mean, it's obviously incredibly damaging. We know it's bad. That we know. Just like the virus, we know it's bad, but you have to make decisions based upon how bad. And you have to make decisions based upon how do you endure and push through and get beyond the problem. We had yesterday a major protest, a Operation Gridlock, they were calling it, in Michigan. You're going to see more of this across the country. People who are saying, enough. We have been told to lock down. We said it was initially 2 weeks, and now it's an additional month. And now it's sounding in some places like it'll be another additional month. We can't go through this endlessly. We can't do it. And for those of us who fall in the less high risk category on this, I need someone to tell me. I need to know, and this is a question that we haven't really been able to get an answer from the authorities, the experts, whatever you want to call them on this. Those of us who are in lockdown who aren't at high risk by age or medical condition, are we just going to get this eventually anyway? Is the plan to just extend this out and disperse it over a longer period of time? If I'm going to start going to work normally in July or August or September or October, am I just going to subject myself to getting this and dealing with the immune response? Because I think we should have some truth about that. We should know that if that's the case. We've been told by Dr. Fauci, the testing will get so great, the tracing will get so great that it's a much, much better weapon against this. Okay, well, serology tests will help us, but how exceptional we really think our testing capacity is going to be for containing this disease going forward once we do start a return to normalcy. You'd have to test everybody every 15 days, or else the old test is irrelevant if they've never been exposed to the disease. So how much testing are we really going to do? I have a lot of questions about this pathway that we've been put on, because remember, I'm going based on what they told me. I know when someone, I'm not pretending to have all the answers here, but I know when someone is lying to me or changing the story. And the story here has been changed. It was that we have to have this unprecedented lockdown across the country. All but 5 states have ordered a shelter in place, whatever they're calling it. It's all effectively the same thing, a shelter in place. Stay home, except for the following very limited circumstances. Here in New York, Governor Cuomo is telling people that you have to, as of Saturday, there's an executive order, you have to wear a mask in public. Now we're mandated to wear masks, including out in the open air, where the only research that I've seen suggests your risk of transmitting or getting this in the open air, if you're not in physical touch with someone, if you're not right next to them or very, very close to them, if you have the 6 feet of distance we've been told about, which is not hard out in the open, your risk is very small. But now we all have to wear masks, including out in public. And that's kind of a change, isn't it? From a month ago, when we were told, don't wear masks, healthcare providers need them. So the story switches. We were told it was to keep the healthcare capacity from being overwhelmed. And now it seems the healthcare capacity, even in New York, New York hospitals, some of them are very, very full, but the overall healthcare capacity is not overwhelmed. And the bigger national level problem right now, and they don't want to talk about this, but this is true. You can see this. The bigger national level problem for health capacity is that they're furloughing hundreds and hundreds of employees at hospitals all over the country. I mean, hundreds per hospital, right? They're emptying out hospitals that are empty because you can't do elective procedures, and it's all about preparation for COVID-19. Well, what does that mean for other people who need care that's essential? What does that mean for people receiving chemotherapy, people that need interventions for more medical conditions than I'd ever be able to name? Well, they're told to wait. They're told to wait. And the doctors and nurses that are going to be needed to treat them, they're told, we'll bring you back at some point, but we can't employ you right now. No check. These are the unintended consequences of a policy of panic. And now you can tell me, you can still make the case to me, I'm open to hearing it, that lockdown was the only choice. The only choice is what we have, which is, I don't know how it could be more extreme than what we've done. What are we going to do? We're going to threaten people if they leave their homes, physically threaten them. The state is going to threaten people if they leave their homes. We've already seen people get arrested for activity that in no sane world would be, not only is it not, should it not be illegal, but it doesn't pose any realistic threat of transmitting any virus. They're shutting down parks and playgrounds all over the country. Why? Children, statistically, if you're under the age of 20, statistically, your risk from this disease, from everything that we've seen so far, and I have not seen a study to contradict this, is almost zero, statistically. I mean, it might be, 0.0001% or something if you're under the age of 20. If you're over the age of 60, this thing is really scary. We all know that. This thing is really bad news for people who are immunosuppressed and who are over the age of 60. Over the age of 50 is borderline. Over the age of 60, it starts to get bad. Over 80, it's really bad, right? So we understand this. We're supposed to look at the data and make determinations based on that. So why are we shutting down playgrounds? What's the thought process behind that? Now we're being told masks in public. We were also told there'd be 2 million people that would die from this if we did nothing, but doing nothing was never really an option, was it? Of course we were going to protect those most at risk. Of course there was going to be an effort to have more stringent procedures for senior citizen homes and for people that are immunocompromised and just people who are of the age of retirement in this country. There was never going to be just go around and cough and sneeze in people's faces like everything is normal. Nobody was planning on that. But they gave us that number. That was the number that scared everybody. Oh, up to 2 million, 500,000 to 2 million people. And then they said, even if you do everything we tell you to do, even if you do everything that we want you to do, it'll be 100 to 250,000. And you say to yourself, well, hold on a second. Right now we're on path. They tell us, the same people, same models, not for 250,000, not for 100,000, but for more like 60,000. Now that's a lot of people dying, but that's also within the range of what we as a society deal with year in and year out from flu. So if we keep the death rate in that range, based on what society for my entire adult life and long before that too has found to be an acceptable risk and acceptable trade-off for normal life for the other few 100 million people in the country, that falls within those parameters, right? 60,000 is a bad flu season. 60,000 in addition would obviously be would be a horrific toll from COVID-19, but it's not the end of the world, which is what people started to think in the early weeks of this. All right, so since we've looked at that, back to the economic picture for a moment. We are in currently the highest unemployment rate since the Great Depression. So let me just put this in clear terms. We are in right now a depression. It is not a recession, it is a depression. We are in a depression of choice. We have chosen to put the United States of America into an economic depression because of the coronavirus, because of COVID-19 infections. We're not able now to undo that decision. We're not able to, but we are able to look at what's going on in the weeks and months ahead and start to shift course away from this maximum lockdown posture. because the costs of this depression, they don't come all right at once. It's not all right away that you figure out how bad things are with this. It's going to take some time, but it's beginning to happen. There are estimates that say that of the businesses that have to close their doors across the United States, not just here in New York. Look, we've gotten it the worst. We're the place that got, crushed by, if you want to think of this as a natural disaster, the hurricane ripped up a lot of houses here in New York City. It has been terrible here. Okay. It has not been as terrible elsewhere in the country. We know that for a fact. We see all the numbers, including in places like LA that are very large urban centers. Nowhere near what we've had here in New York City. But the New York approach, which was, and I think we need to say this, it feels like something like this, our decision went from don't panic. And then about 3 weeks ago, the government, all the way up to the White House and everyone else, turned around and said, oh, no, panic. It is time we got to panic right now. It's panic time. And that's how you get the whole country shutting down the economy and telling everyone to stay at home, and no room for discussion about a more targeted, using a scalpel instead of a sledgehammer approach to this. And if you even wanted to have that discussion, you were shouted down as wanting to kill grandma and a horrible person and all the rest of that idiocy. Well, now the pendulum is swinging toward the other direction, where you're going to have 30% of businesses across the country perhaps not reopen. You're going to have tens of millions of people without jobs. You're going to have the government take on, not in a year, in a few months, a couple extra $1 trillion, 2, 3, who knows, $4 trillion of debt. Does anyone understand how much stress this is going to put on our system? I think the people in charge are starting to understand.
Well, I'm a very data-driven person, and I don't like to average things. I think you lose the individuals and how things are going at the individual community level. I'm very much about focusing on the communities and seeing communities that have been able to really move through this epidemic with less infections, less deaths, less hospital admissions, and then the communities that we're seeing that are super hit so hard by this epidemic. And so when you look at that, you can see states where they have good surveillance up and running now, where they haven't really seen significant increases in cases. And so this has got to be done in a very laser-focused, data-driven manner. But as the data has come in, I think we're very confident that we can actually see places that could do very well with some decreasing restrictions.
There we go. Okay. One of the two big experts saying we got to start reopening the economy. Folks, that means there's going to be some risk here. We all understand that, right? But even the epidemiologists recognize we can't keep doing this lockdown. Can't do it.
What we had before was a miracle, and we think this is going to be even more than a miracle. We're going to do it because we have the greatest people in the world. We'll also be speaking to America's governors tomorrow, and then we'll be announcing exactly what's happening. You already know we'll be opening up states, some states much sooner than others. And we think some of the states can actually open up before the deadline of May 1st. And I think that will be a very exciting time indeed. Governors are looking forward. They're chomping at the bit to get going.
I certainly appreciate the president's optimism. The miracle will come back. The miraculous economy will be happening again. And we need to hear that. Remember, optimism, confidence, these are not just fun things to talk about or make us feel a little bit better. They matter to the economy. They matter to the willingness that people have to spend money, to take risk, to open their doors, and to start engaging in the kind of activity that is productive and that creates wealth. So the president's right in that regard. He's right to say that we should hope for that soon. How do we get there? Well, for one, we need to keep people from being in a terrible situation right now. We need to keep people from having to. I mean, you've already seen these lines of individuals that are miles long, it seems, from the video that I've been watching, waiting to get access to a food bank because they just simply don't have enough food, right? We have individuals who recognize that this is a bad time in the economy at the very top, but I don't think because they're not experiencing what that's like. They're not experiencing the fear of not being able to pay bills or just have cash on hand. A lot of us think, okay, well, if you don't have cash, use credit cards. People don't have credit cards. A lot of Americans don't even have a checking account. They go and there's a reason all of these check cashing businesses exist. People take their check from work, they cash it. And now is not the time for anyone to start trying to lecture on the need for greater fiscal planning or something, right? We just need to get people who were working, who were productive, they were doing the right things. People listening to this show right now who are either out of a job or furloughed from a job have zero responsibility for that circumstance. None. The government more or less came along and said, you don't have a job anymore. Well, if the government's going to tell you don't have a job, the government also has a responsibility to say, hey, here's money to make sure you are fed, that you don't get kicked out of your home, that you have what you need, that you are okay while we are dealing with this crisis. That's an obligation of the state. The state imposed that obligation on itself the moment that it took from you your freedom of operation, your right to go to work, your right to earn a living. Meanwhile, the Democrats, when Nancy Pelosi is not having a giggle with a sweater around her shoulders in her San Francisco supermansion with, an array of artisan ice cream that would make even a Brooklyn hipster say that's a bit much. She doesn't have any time, it seems, to really deal with this. She still refuses to allow for, the Democrats are holding up the additional funds needed in the Paycheck Protection Program. This is just money for a program they've already approved. There's no discussion. There's no debate. This is the program. You said the kids need to buy a pizza on Friday. You left them $20, but the pizza cost $25. Do you want them to have pizza or not? Oh, Nancy Pelosi says, well, if they can't have pizza, let them eat cake. Play 8 here.
As an example, with the paycheck plan, that's going so well. It's so smooth, so beautiful, almost without a hitch. All of that money is being distributed to small businesses. They're giving it to their employees. It's keeping them ready, viable, so when we open. And now it's been so good that it's almost depleted, and we want to replenish it, and we can't get the Democrats to approve it. And that's a program that they and everybody else admit that are great.
Can't get the Democrats to approve it. I thought the Democrats were the party of working people and trying to help the little guy and gal and whatever make-believe gender the Democrats are talking about today. Notice how all that's dropped away. Not getting a lot of lectures right now about using plural pronouns for singular individuals, right? I haven't heard anybody, I haven't seen anybody over at Vox where they're actually about to lay off a whole bunch of people. Amazing, isn't it? These liberal sites they raise all this money and they get all this acclaim from their own side. And it turns out that because they're just parroting what every other lib is saying, they really don't add any value. And so the moment that they don't have that venture capital cash to keep them afloat and things get a little tough, guess what? They got problems, big problems, even though they raised something like $300 million. So that, people can pretend that Ezra Klein is an intellectual. It's bizarre to me, but that's where we are. But you have Nancy Pelosi, who stands athwart this program. Nancy Pelosi, Democrats are always telling us how much they feel the pain of the working man and woman and how much they want. Here's Nancy Pelosi trying to say that she's doing the right thing here. Meanwhile, the Democrats have refused to allow the administration to do additional funding. Here's my thought. It's almost like this has become so egregious that you would have to say Democrats are sabotaging the rescue mission. And we're rescuing the American people here economically. Democrats are actively sabotaging this by delay. I can't think of another explanation. I can't think of another reason. Their other reasons are lies. We're not stupid. We know they're lying to us. But here's what Pelosi says. Play 5.
A week ago from yesterday, the Secretary of the Treasury called me, said I need $250 billion in 48 hours for the PPP. Well, we support the PPP. It was part of our putting together CARES 1. We were successful, the Democrats in the House and Senate, in flipping it from a corporate trickle-down bill to a workers' first bubble-up bill. And part of it was that Paycheck Protection Program. But we want it to work for everyone. What we were finding out in just even the first hours of it was that the initiative, it was not working for the, shall we say, underbanked.
Not working, huh, Nancy? That's the latest story. She really is a disgrace. I mean, she typifies the worst of the limousine liberals, the phony, the giant fake virtue signaling, ultra rich elite libs who don't give a crap about the little people, but just manipulate and brainwash the masses as much as possible into thinking that only the state can save them, and the only people running the state who will save them are people like Nancy Pelosi. Okay, everybody, this is a time when it's very important to be willing to ask the questions, willing to ask the big questions out there about what we're doing, what the response is. Are we making the right choices every day, every time? Are we doing the best for ourselves, for the economy, for suppression of the virus? Alex Berenson's a former New York Times reporter and author of many books. He's been willing to challenge the consensus to at least explain itself, the shutdown consensus, that is. He now joins us. Alex, thanks for making the time.
Buck, it's a great pleasure.
I have some specifics that I've been looking forward to getting to ask you about, and I've been following your work very closely online. Let's just start with this. We have the unemployment numbers that just came in for the most recent week. We're at depression-level unemployment. We're heading toward the absolute peak in terms of the Great Depression's highest level of unemployment. We're going to be there in a matter of weeks. What are you going to say at this point when someone asks you, how are we doing in our fight against the virus from a policy level?
We're doing a terrible job right now. We made decisions a month ago on the basis of panic, and I understand that panic. I was actually quite worried, in early March too, and certainly I was paying attention to this. I bet you were, from January on, and some of the numbers out of China looked pretty bad. And and obviously we didn't do much in February when we could have, and then suddenly, these hospitals in northern Italy got overrun. And we panicked, and we shut the whole country down essentially in a matter of weeks. And people warned a month ago. The president of the Federal Reserve of St. Louis warned just how bad things were going to be. But I'm not sure that policymakers either believed him or cared. But in reality, the economic devastation, the societal devastation, the educational devastation here has been off the charts. It's been impossible really to measure by any by any of the metrics we have. It's off the charts, and it's not just in the U.S. By the way. It's in Europe, and it's really, as far as I can tell, I don't know that we've ever had a synchronized worldwide slowdown in economic growth like this. Maybe the Great Depression. I guess you'd have to be an economic historian to know. So we've done all this, and we've pushed harder and harder. And at the same time, there's less and less evidence that this virus is some kind of societal threat. That's not to say that that the coronavirus is not real. That's not to say that the coronavirus can't kill people. That's not to say that it isn't particularly dangerous to elderly people and people in nursing homes. That's quite clear. The evidence is if it gets into a nursing home, it can kill a lot of people pretty quickly. But the evidence now is overwhelming that this is not very dangerous to people under 30. I mean, to them, there's almost no risk. To people under 50 who don't have comorbidities, and even into people who are somewhat older who don't have a lot of, other medical problems. And the media is not reporting that. They're not reporting who's really getting sick and dying here. They're not reporting that outside of New York City, hospitals in the United States are emptying out, that hospitals in the United States are losing money because they are so empty right now. They are not reporting the truth about what's going on. And the hysteria is terrible, and the economic devastation is worse.
Now let's look specifically at the primary claim here that you're hearing from, and I call it the lockdown consensus. I mean, however one wants to phrase it, but that's what we've been dealing with. The consensus for a few weeks, as much as there can be on these things, has been lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. Okay. Sure. Does it work? Given that the alternative, and this was the false choice we were offered, it was either lockdown or you want to watch Granny die for your 401k. I'm sure you've seen a lot of that. I've seen some of the ugly stuff online. I'm sure you've been subject to it. I know I have. Anyone who wanted to raise any questions, the real issue would be lockdown versus other measures short of shutting down the economy. What evidence is there that lockdowns do not work as they have been advertised?
Okay, so this is a great question, and it takes a little while to unpack. So let me start with, what were the lockdowns supposed to do? Okay, the lockdowns, initially, nobody said the lockdowns are going to prevent everyone from getting infected. Okay, the idea is this is a new virus, and it's going to spread, and some people are going to get sick from it. The idea of the lockdowns was, quote unquote, flatten the curve. What did that really mean? It meant spread out the impact on the healthcare system. So the idea was, what we don't want is what happened in Italy. What we don't want is hospitals that are overrun with, tens of thousands or thousands of elderly people and can't do their jobs. And doctors and nurses and medical staff are heroic, but they're working themselves to death. And we are losing hospitals. Okay, that was the promise of the lockdowns was not everyone's going to live forever and no one's ever going to get coronavirus. It was, we're going to stretch this out. Okay, even on that basis. So let's say that actually did work as promised. The economic devastation here, now that we know that this virus is not as dangerous as we thought it was a month ago, I think has to be weighed against this idea of health system disruption. But there's an even more important point, which is we haven't seen any health system disruption. So the lockdown, so then people will say, okay, well, we haven't seen health system disruption because of the lockdowns. But that's not true either. And the proof of that, and this is where I sort of got, started to get heard from about 2 to 3 weeks ago, is that there was this model, which is still around, called the University of Washington model, which charted deaths and hospitalizations on a daily basis in the United States. And it said, this is how many people are going to be hospitalized from COVID every day. This is how many people are going to need ICUs. This is how many people are going to die. And that was completely wrong in real time. That model was released on March 26th, and within a week to 10 days, it was predicting 4 times as many hospital beds would be needed as were actually needed. Not in the future, on a day-to-day basis, it was that wrong. And it's really important, Buck, to understand why it was so wrong. It was so wrong because the assumption that the modelers had made was that the lockdowns had come in too late, that there was going to be this huge surge of cases that sort of people they get sick, they get infected, then they show symptoms a few days later, then they wind up in the hospital a few days after that, then they wind up in an ICU, then maybe they die, okay? And that process doesn't happen overnight. It takes somewhere around 3 weeks. It could be 2 weeks for one person, it could be 3 weeks for another, it could be 4 weeks for another. But ultimately, the theory was there's a ton of people who were infected before the lockdowns came into place, and they are really going to cause a huge problem. It didn't happen. And we still don't quite know why it didn't happen. But there's no way to look at that data and say it's because the lockdowns helped us. That's not what the data says. What the data says is that at best, the lockdowns were irrelevant.
All right. Now, given that that's been the situation, particularly when you look at it in the context of New York, we were told that they would need, what was it? I think Cuomo said 30,000 ventilators. I haven't heard, and I don't think that's an accident, how many ventilators have they actually needed?
So the projection was at the worst time, and again, this was in late March, as the cases were doubling and doubling. People sort of went crazy with their projections. The projections were we're going to need 140,000 hospital beds in New York State, and we're going to need 30,000 to 40,000 ventilators. Those projections were off by a factor of 10. Okay, almost 10. New York State beds peaked around 18,000. They're going down now. Ventilators peaked around 4,000. New York, not Nebraska or Arizona or somewhere else. New York is giving ventilators to other states right now because it doesn't need the ones it has. This has already peaked, It has already peaked nationally, and it has already peaked in New York, and the data is completely clear on that. And that's why what you're hearing now from the public health people who've been so wrong is not, hey, give us 2 more weeks and you'll see. What they're talking about is a second wave. Okay, the nice thing from their point of view about predicting a second wave is that could be any time. It could be in 6 months, it could be in 3 months, it could be in 2 years. Well, as long as there's no vaccine, there's always a theoretical possibility of a second
Right.
wave.
And if we're going to fight against that, we would have to continue the lockdown well beyond what anyone says we'd ever do. Alex, I want to continue. I got a few specifics that I want to drill down into with you. We just need to hit a quick station break here. We're going to come back in a moment. Guys, we're talking to Alex Berenson, who is asking the big questions about our pandemic response. Follow him on Twitter at Alex Berenson. We'll be right back.